He had her by the collar, screaming in her face in front of a packed cafe, when the door chimed and the room went dead silent. Derek Kane didn't notice the man in the black suit until a calm voice cut through the chaos, the 4 words that made his blood drain instantly. Because the waitress he'd just assaulted wasn't alone, and the man walking toward him owned this city. If this story pulled you in, go ahead and subscribe so you never miss what's ahead. I've got another unforgettable story coming tomorrow. And while you're here, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing people tuned in from all over the world. Okay, let's get back into it. The manager's fingers dig into Carolina's collar hard enough to leave marks. He shoves her against the espresso counter. The impact rattles porcelain cups stacked beside the machine. Steam hisses. A spoon clatters to the tile floor. The sound echoes through sudden, suffocating silence. Derek Kane's face is crimson, veins bulging at his temples, spit flying as he screams inches from her face. You think you're special? You think you can steal from my cafe and walk away? It's 8:17 p.m. Tuesday evening. Every table is full. The overhead pendant lights, brushed copper, hanging at staggered heights, cast warm bronze glows across exposed brick walls and blonde wood tables. Jazz piano drifts softly through speakers, but no one hears it anymore. Conversations have died. Forks hover suspended over plates of pasta carbonara and seared salmon. Wine glasses freeze halfway to lips. Near the front window, a couple celebrating their anniversary sits paralyzed, the woman's hand covering her mouth. At table 6, 3 investors in charcoal suits exchange uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they're invisible. The hostess, a teenager named Sophie who usually works the entrance, has abandoned her stand and backed toward the kitchen door, phone clutched in trembling hands. Carolina's voice comes out steady despite the hand crushing her collar, despite her feet barely touching the ground. I didn't do anything wrong. Check the payment logs. Derek's grip tightens. His other hand rises, palm open, shaking with rage. Don't you dare talk back to me. Behind the counter, partially hidden by the industrial espresso machine, Clara stands with her arms crossed. Her expression is carefully neutral, but her eyes gleam with barely concealed satisfaction. She knows exactly what she did. She knows she swapped those payment receipts 40 minutes ago when Carolina was taking orders at table 9. She made it look like Carolina pocketed $300 from the VIP table, the one with the tech executives who always tip big. She'd been planning it for weeks. Watching Carolina collect generous tips night after night. Watching customers request Carolina's section specifically. Watching Derek's eyes follow Carolina around the dining room with that predatory interest that made Clara's skin crawl not from disgust, but from envy that his attention never landed on her. This explosion was exactly what Clara wanted. The door opens, not with a bang, not dramatically, just opens. The small brass bell above the entrance gives a soft chime that somehow cuts through the tension like a blade. Cool evening air drifts in, carrying the scent of rain-soaked pavement and distant car exhaust. The man who enters doesn't rush, doesn't announce himself. He simply stops 3 steps inside the threshold, his dark eyes scanning the room with the kind of predatory attention that makes even innocent people nervous. He's wearing a black suit, perfectly tailored, expensive fabric that catches the light. No tie. The collar of his charcoal shirt is open just enough to reveal tattoos crawling up from his collarbone. Dark geometric patterns and script that disappear under fabric, but promise more beneath. His hands hang relaxed at his sides, and the pendant lights catch more ink across his knuckles, symbols, and letters that look almost tribal. He's younger than Derek, maybe early 30s, with dark hair swept back, strong jawline, and the kind of face that could be handsome in different circumstances. But right now, his expression is something else entirely. Calm. Unreasonably calm. The kind of dangerous calm that comes from men who've witnessed violence so frequently, it no longer registers as remarkable. His gaze sweeps the frozen diners, the abandoned hostess stand, the nervous investors, and finally settles on the scene at the espresso counter. The manager in the blue shirt, the young woman in black, the hand twisted in her collar, the raised palm. Something in his posture changes, not obviously, just a subtle shift in weight, a fractional tightening around his eyes. What Derek Kane doesn't know, in less than 2 minutes, 4 words from this stranger will drain every drop of color from his face and destroy everything he's spent 5 years building. The man walks forward. His footsteps are measured, deliberate, Italian leather shoes clicking softly against tile. Other customers sense something primal, and shrink back in their chairs without understanding why. The couple by the window exchanges wide-eyed glances. One of the investors quietly signals for the check. Derek finally notices the movement. He turns his head, irritated by the interruption. By this stranger who thinks he can just walk into his establishment during a disciplinary situation. "We're closed for new seating," Derek snaps, still gripping Carolina's collar. "You'll have to wait outside." The man doesn't respond immediately. He stops 6 feet away, close enough to be threatening, far enough to seem controlled. His dark eyes move slowly, deliberately, from Derek's flushed face down to the hand twisted in Carolina's collar, back up to Derek's eyes. The silence stretches, becomes uncomfortable. When he finally speaks, his voice is quiet, almost polite, but it carries through the cafe like a bass note through still water. "What's happening here?" The room shifts. Customers who'd been pretending not to watch now stare openly. The investors go rigid. Someone near the back whispers urgently into their phone. Sophie, the hostess, has her camera app open, recording. Derek's ego won't let him back down. Not in front of his staff, not in front of customers, not in front of this tattooed stranger in an expensive suit who thinks he can question him. "None of your business," Derek says, tightening his grip on Carolina for emphasis. She winces. "This is employee discipline. Internal matter. If you want to eat, you can wait outside until—" "Let her go." The words are calm, conversational even. But there's something underneath them. Something that makes Sophie back another step toward the kitchen. Something that makes Clara's satisfied smile falter and die. Derek releases Carolina more from shock at being interrupted than from compliance, and turns fully, chest puffed, shoulders squared. He's 6'1", former college linebacker, 220 pounds of muscle gone slightly soft but still imposing. He's used to intimidating people with his size, his voice, his position. The stranger is maybe 6 foot exactly, leaner. But the way he stands weight perfectly balanced, hands loose, eyes flat, and unblinking reads like a completely different language of violence. "And who the hell are you?" Derek demands. The man's gaze flicks to Carolina one more time. She's stepped back from the counter, rubbing her throat where Derek's fingers left angry red marks. Her breathing is uneven, but she's not crying, not begging. Her eyes meet the stranger's, and something passes between them. Recognition, apology, resignation, love. The man looks back at Derek. 4 words. Quiet, final. "She is my sister." Silence crashes through the cafe like a physical weight. Derek's mouth opens slightly. His brain struggles to process the words, trying to match them against fragments of whispered conversations. Half-remembered warnings from people who know how the city's underworld actually works. The name comes to him slowly, then all at once. Rocha. Horacio Rocha doesn't move, doesn't elaborate, doesn't need to. He simply watches Derek's face as recognition slowly, horribly, dawns like blood spreading through water. But to understand the man standing in that cafe, to understand why his sister chose to work tables rather than live under his protection, you need to go back 23 years, to a house where love and violence were the same. Language. Their father's name was Gabriel Rocha, and he believed weakness was a disease that infected bloodlines. The house they grew up in wasn't small. 3 bedrooms in a working-class neighborhood where people minded their own business because asking questions could shorten your life. But it felt small, suffocating, like the walls were always closing in. Gabriel ruled that house like a dictator rules a country through fear, through unpredictability, through violence that came without warning and ended only when he decided it would end. "Pain is the only honest teacher," he'd say, unbuckling his belt. "Everything else is lies people tell themselves to feel safe." Horacio was 8 years old the first time his father broke his ribs. He'd cried during a confrontation with older boys at school, not from the punches they'd landed, but from frustration that he couldn't fight back effectively. Gabriel found out. That night, Horacio learned that showing weakness had consequences far worse than any schoolyard beating. "You think those boys hurt you?" Gabriel had whispered, kneeling beside his son's bed hours later, after the punishment was done. "I just taught you something they never could. I taught you that tears accomplish nothing. That mercy is a luxury only the strong can afford. And you're not strong yet." Horacio had stared at the ceiling, breathing shallow, ribs, screaming, and said nothing. "But you will be," Gabriel continued, almost gently. "Because I'm going to make sure of it." Carolina was born 3 years later, and for the first time in his life, Horacio understood what it meant to love something more than you feared pain. She was different from the beginning. Where Horacio learned to harden himself, to absorb their father's lessons like a sponge soaking up poison, Carolina remained impossibly soft. She cried easily, laughed freely, saw beauty in things that didn't make sense. Flowers growing through sidewalk cracks, stray cats with matted fur, the way sunlight looked coming through dirty windows. Their father noticed. "That girl is going to be weak," he told Horacio when Carolina was 5. "Unless we fix her." But Horacio had already decided something in those 3 years of being a brother. Whatever Gabriel Rocha did to him, he would never let him do to her. He became a shield. When Gabriel's rage boiled over, Horacio made sure he was the target. He learned to read his father's moods, to provoke him strategically, to draw attention away from Carolina's small mistakes. He took beatings that should have been hers. Absorbed punishments meant for her tears, her sensitivity, her softness. And late at night, when Carolina would sneak into his room shaking from nightmares about their father, Horacio would let her curl up beside him and tell her stories about places where people didn't have to be afraid. "Is it real?" she'd whisper. "A place like that?" "Yes," he'd lie, because the truth that he didn't know, that maybe nowhere was safe, would have destroyed her. She was his reminder that gentleness existed, that not everyone had to become what Gabriel Rocha was building. But Gabriel had other plans for his son. Starting when Horacio turned 13, his father began taking him to meetings. Warehouses where men spoke in code and money changed hands in duffel bags. Back rooms of restaurants where disagreements were settled with fists or worse. Collections from business owners who paid for protection, with shaking hands and averted eyes. "This is your inheritance," Gabriel explained, driving home from one such meeting. "This is how the world actually works. The strong take, the weak give. Everything else is theater." Horacio watched, learned, absorbed the ecosystem of violence and control that his father had spent decades building. And slowly, inevitably, he began to understand it, to see the logic, to recognize that his father, for all his brutality, had been right about one thing. The world did not reward softness. Carolina, meanwhile, grew up in the margins of that world. She saw enough to understand what their father was, what Horacio was becoming, but Horacio made sure she never saw too much. He kept her in regular school while he dropped out, made excuses when Gabriel wanted her present at family business, created a bubble of normalcy around her, even as his own world darkened. She became his North Star, the proof that another way of living was possible. Gabriel Rocha died when Horacio was 24 and Carolina was 21. Heart attack, sudden, violent, appropriate for a man who'd lived through violence his entire life. At the funeral, men in expensive suits paid their respects. They looked at Horacio differently now, not as Gabriel's son, but as Gabriel's successor. The inheritance was clear. The network was his. Carolina stood beside him at the cemetery, wearing black, silent. When everyone had left, she finally spoke. "You don't have to become him." Horacio looked at his sister, 21 years old, still impossibly soft despite everything, still capable of crying at funerals even for a father who'd terrorized them both. "Yes," he said quietly, "I do." Because he'd already become Gabriel. Had been becoming him for 11 years. The only difference was that Horacio was smarter, more strategic, less prone to emotional violence, but the foundation was the same. Carolina's face crumbled. "Then I can't stay." "I know." They stood in silence among the gravestones. "I'll always love you," she said finally, "but I can't watch you become him. I can't live in that world." "I'll always protect you," Horacio replied, "but I can't leave it." 3 weeks later, Carolina packed 2 suitcases and boarded a bus to another state. She took almost nothing, changed her social circles, started over completely. She loved her brother desperately, but she loved her own soul more. Horacio let her go. It was the kindest thing he could do. For 2 years, they spoke rarely. Birthday calls, occasional texts. Carolina never asked about his business. Horacio never asked her to come back. She worked small jobs, retail, then food service. She was good with people, warm, the kind of person customers requested by name. Eventually, she found work at an upscale cafe in a neighborhood full of young professionals and expensive apartments. The tips were generous. The work was honest. No one knew her last name meant anything. She was finally building something that belonged only to her, until Derek Kane was hired as manager, and until jealousy turned one colleague into an enemy. And until tonight, when Horacio decided to surprise his sister with a visit, to see how she was doing, to make sure she was safe. Instead, he walked through the door and saw a man's hand around her throat. Carolina's apartment was small, but it was hers. Fifth-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better decades. Peeling paint in the stairwell. A radiator that clanged at 3 a.m. A bathroom where the shower pressure was more suggestion than force. But when she closed the door behind her each night, she could breathe. No violence waiting around corners. No men speaking in code about shipments and territories. No phone calls in the middle of the night that meant someone was dead or about to be. Just silence. Safety. The kind of ordinary poverty that millions of people lived in without fear. She decorated slowly, carefully, with things from thrift stores and clearance sales. A wooden shelf for books she'd never had time to read. Plants on the windowsill, succulents that didn't mind neglect. A blanket her elderly neighbor had crocheted in exchange for Carolina helping her carry groceries. It wasn't much. It was everything. She'd been working at Bellario's cafe for 7 months when the envy started. The cafe itself was beautiful, all exposed brick and warm lighting. The kind of place where young professionals spent $12 on avocado toast and didn't blink. The owner, Mr. Bellario, ran it more like a theater than a restaurant. Everything had to be perfect. The presentation, the atmosphere, the experience. Carolina fit naturally into that world. She had a gift for reading people, knowing when customers wanted conversation and when they wanted to be left alone. Remembering that the regular at table 3 took his espresso with 2 sugars, not 1, noticing when someone seemed down, and offering a genuine smile that actually helped. "You make it look easy," Sophie, the hostess, had told her once. "It's just paying attention," Carolina had replied. But it wasn't just that. Carolina genuinely cared. She'd spent her childhood in a house where human connection was transactional, where affection was currency and vulnerability was weakness. This job let her practice a different kind of humanity. One where kindness didn't cost her anything. Customers noticed. They requested her section. Left 25% tips instead of 15, sometimes more. One regular, an older woman who came in every Thursday, started bringing Carolina small gifts, a scarf, a bookmark, a bar of expensive chocolate. "You remind me of my daughter," the woman had said, before she moved to Seattle. Carolina had smiled, touched the woman's hand briefly. "I'm sure she misses you too." By her 5th month, Carolina was consistently the top earner among the waitstaff. That's when Clara started watching her differently. Clara Mendez had been working at Bellario's for 2 years. She'd been there when the cafe first opened, had helped Mr. Bellario set up the initial table arrangements, had memorized the menu before there were even customers to serve it to. She considered herself senior staff, experienced, valuable. Then Carolina arrived, and suddenly Clara's tips dropped. Not dramatically, not enough to complain about officially, but enough to notice, enough to sting. Customers who used to request Clara's section now asked for the girl with the warm smile. Tables that used to leave Clara solid 20% tips now left 15, sometimes 12. Clara told herself it didn't matter, that she was professional enough to rise above petty competition. But every night, when the staff counted their tips in the back room, Clara watched Carolina's stack grow thicker than hers. Watched the other servers congratulate Carolina on another great night. Watched Sophie ask Carolina for advice on handling difficult customers. The resentment grew slowly, like mold in a dark corner. "You're so lucky," Clara said one night, her tone light but her eyes hard, "getting all the generous tables." Carolina looked up from counting bills. "I think it's just random. You had that great 6-top yesterday." "Right, random." Clara's smile didn't reach her eyes. Carolina had grown up reading Dangerous Men. She knew when someone's words didn't match their intentions. But this was different. This was supposed to be normal life. Normal workplace dynamics. She didn't want to see threats everywhere, so she ignored the warning signs. She ignored the way Clara started hovering near her tables, listening to her interactions. Ignored how Clara's compliments had a sharp edge underneath. Ignored the small mistakes that started appearing in her section, wrong orders sent to her tables, reservation mix-ups that made her look incompetent. "I think Clara has a problem with me," Carolina had mentioned to Sophie once. Sophie, barely 18 and uncomfortable with conflict, had shrugged. "She's probably just stressed. Her boyfriend moved out last month." Carolina let it drop. She didn't want to create drama. didn't want to be the kind of person who saw conspiracies in workplace friction. She'd left her brother's world specifically to avoid paranoia and power games. This was supposed to be simple. Honest work. Normal problems. Then Derek Kane was hired as the new manager. Mr. Bellario had been looking for someone to handle day-to-day operations while he focused on opening a second location. Derek came with impressive references: 5 years managing a high-end restaurant downtown, a degree in hospitality management, glowing recommendations from previous employers. He was handsome in a conventional way, tall, fit, the kind of confident that came from men who'd never seriously been told no. His first week, he watched the staff carefully. His second week, he started making changes. New seating rotations, different table assignments, a revised schedule that somehow gave Clara more prime Friday and Saturday shifts. His third week, he noticed Carolina. "You're very good with customers," he said one evening, catching her near the coffee station. "Natural talent." "Thank you," Carolina replied, professional but distant. "I'd like to discuss your potential here. Maybe over drinks sometime?" There it was, the subtle shift from professional to personal. The suggestion disguised as opportunity. "I appreciate that," Carolina said carefully, "but I'm happy with things as they are." Derek's smile tightened fractionally. "Of course. Professional development can happen here too. We should talk in my office sometime." Carolina nodded politely and escaped. But she felt his eyes following her the rest of the night. The advances became less subtle over the following weeks. Comments about her appearance, suggestions that ambitious people make strategic connections, questions about her personal life that crossed professional boundaries. Carolina deflected each one. She'd dealt with men like Derek before, men who confused power with attractiveness, who thought their position entitled them to whatever they wanted. She knew how to maintain boundaries without creating direct conflict. But Derek wasn't used to rejection, and Clara was watching everything. One Friday night, after Carolina had earned nearly $300 in tips from a particularly generous section, Clara lingered by the espresso machine while Carolina cleaned her tables. "He likes you," Clara said quietly. Carolina didn't need to ask who. That's his problem. "Careful," Clara warned, but her tone wasn't friendly. It was something else, something calculating. Men like Derek don't handle rejection well. Carolina met her eyes. "Then maybe he should learn." Clara's expression shifted. The mask of concern fell away, revealing something cold underneath. "Maybe you should learn?" she said softly. "That not everyone here wants you to succeed." She walked away before Carolina could respond. That night, lying in her small apartment, listening to the radiator clang, Carolina thought about calling her brother, but she didn't. She'd left that world, left his protection, left the safety that came with his name. She was building something on her own. She could handle this. She had to believe that. Derek Kane's office was on the second floor, overlooking the main dining area through a tinted glass window. He liked watching the floor from up there, liked the feeling of surveying his domain, liked knowing that everyone below could sense his presence, even when they couldn't see him directly. Control was something Derek understood intimately. He'd grown up middle class in a suburb where everyone looked the same, acted the same, wanted the same things. He'd learned early that the world rewarded confidence and punished hesitation, that opportunities went to people who took them, not people who waited for permission. His father had been a middle manager at an insurance company, comfortable, but never powerful, never respected. Derek had watched him accept mediocrity for 30 years and decided he'd rather die than live like that. So Derek climbed. He networked aggressively, dressed expensively, learned to read what people wanted, and position himself as the person who could provide it. He moved from restaurant to restaurant, always upward, always toward more prestigious establishments, more authority, better titles. Bellario's wasn't the pinnacle, but it was a stepping stone, and Derek treated stepping stones as things to be used. Carolina Rocha was a problem. Not because she was bad at her job, quite the opposite. She was excellent. Customers loved her. Her section consistently generated the highest sales. Mr. Bellario had mentioned her positively in 3 separate management meetings. No, Carolina was a problem because she didn't understand how things worked. Derek had made his interest clear. Subtle at first, compliments about her service, questions about her background, suggestions that ambitious people found mentors who could help them advance. She'd smiled politely and deflected every single one. Then he'd been more direct, invited her for drinks, suggested private meetings in his office to discuss her future, made it clear that he saw potential in her, that he could help her, that being close to him came with advantages. She'd declined. professionally, but firmly. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, Derek had tried patience. Tried giving her premium shifts, thinking she'd recognize the favoritism and respond accordingly. Tried engineering situations where they'd be alone, asking her to help with inventory in the storage room, requesting she stay late for closing procedures. She remained distant, polite, but unreachable, and Derek's patience was running out. Tuesday afternoon, before the dinner shift, Derek called Clara into his office. She entered carefully, closing the door behind her. Clara understood power dynamics. She'd been watching Derek since he arrived, noticing how he operated, what he responded to. "Sit," Derek said, not looking up from his laptop. Clara sat. "Carolina," Derek said finally, still typing. "Tell me about her." Clara's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. "What do you want to know?" "Background, friends, relationships. Why she acts like she's too good for this place. She keeps to herself mostly," Clara said carefully. "Been here 7 months. Shows up on time. Doesn't socialize much with staff. No boyfriend that I know of." Derek stopped typing, looked at Clara directly. "She's costing the team money." Clara blinked. "How?" "Hoarding the best tables. Taking tips that should be distributed more fairly. Creating inequality among the staff." Derek's tone was smooth, practiced. "Several employees have complained. This was a lie. But Clara didn't know that." "I see," Clara said slowly. "I need documentation," Derek continued. "If she's violating policies, mishandling payments, anything that would justify disciplinary action, can you help me with that?" Clara was quiet for a moment. Derek watched her face carefully. He knew her type, competent but overlooked, resentful but professional, practical enough to see opportunity when it presented itself. "She did seem confused about a payment yesterday," Clara said finally. "Table 9. I had to correct her. Did you document it?" "No, but—" "Start documenting," Derek interrupted. "Every mistake, every policy violation, every customer complaint. I need a file on her." Clara nodded slowly. "And if there aren't any mistakes?" Derek smiled. "Everyone makes mistakes, Clara. Some people just need help making them." The harassment escalated after that conversation. Derek began finding reasons to criticize Carolina publicly. Her uniform wasn't pressed correctly. Her table setup was sloppy. Her interaction with a customer had been too familiar. None of it was true. But he said it in front of other staff, in front of customers, with just enough authority that people assumed he must be right. Carolina handled it quietly at first, accepted the criticism, corrected things that didn't need correcting, tried to stay professional. "You're being too hard on her," Sophie whispered to Derek one evening. "I'm maintaining standards," Derek replied coldly. "Something you should worry about for yourself." Sophie didn't bring it up again. Derek started cutting Carolina's breaks, assigning her the most difficult tables, the ones with demanding customers, complicated orders, people who complained regardless of service quality, scheduling her for the worst shifts Sunday mornings when tips were light, Monday lunches when the cafe was nearly empty. Her income dropped 20% in 2 weeks, and through it all, Carolina said nothing. She didn't complain to Mr. Bellario, who was busy with the new location, didn't argue with Derek's criticisms, didn't fight back when he publicly humiliated her for manufactured mistakes. She absorbed it, endured it, kept working, and that made Derek angrier. One evening, after closing, Derek cornered her near the storage room. The cafe was empty except for Clara, who was counting the register, and Sophie, who was mopping the entrance area. Carolina was restocking napkins when she felt his presence behind her. "We need to talk," Derek said quietly. Carolina turned, maintaining distance. "About what?" "About your attitude problem." "I don't have an attitude problem." "That," Derek said, stepping closer, "is exactly the problem. You think you're better than this place, better than me." Carolina's pulse quickened, but her voice stayed level. "I just want to do my job." "Your job," Derek said, voice dropping lower, "would be a lot easier if you were smarter about relationships here. If you understood how things work. I understand perfectly." Derek's jaw tightened. He moved closer, backing her subtly against the storage shelves. Not touching her. Not yet. But violating her space deliberately. "Do you?" he whispered. "Because from where I stand, you're making your life very difficult. Bad shifts, bad tables, bad reviews in your file. All of that could change." Carolina met his eyes directly. "Not interested." "You should be," Derek said. His hand moved to the shelf beside her head, caging her in. Because right now, you're one mistake away from being fired. And I decide what counts as a mistake." The threat hung in the air between them. Carolina could smell his cologne, could see the anger masked as confidence in his expression, could feel how much he enjoyed having power over her. It reminded her of her father, and something cold settled in her chest. "Move," she said quietly. "Or what? Or I'll scream." Derek smiled. "And tell them what? That your manager was having a professional conversation with you in a storage room? That sounds like your problem, not mine." He stayed there for another 5 seconds, then stepped back casually, as if nothing had happened. "Think about what I said, Carolina. Smart people make smart choices." He walked away. Carolina stood there, hands shaking, rage and fear mixing in her bloodstream. She thought about calling Horacio then, telling him everything, but she didn't. She'd handle this herself. She had to. The VIP reservation came through on Monday morning. Mr. Bellario himself called Derek with the details. 3 tech executives from a venture capital firm downtown. They were considering investing in the second location. This dinner was crucial, impress them, and the expansion moved forward with serious funding. Disappoint them, and the whole project stalled. "I need this flawless," Mr. Bellario said over the phone. "Absolutely flawless." "Consider it done," Derek replied, already planning. He assigned the VIP table to Carolina, not because she was the best server though she was, and not to give her an opportunity, though it would appear that way to everyone else. Derek assigned her the table because he'd been building a file on her for 2 weeks, small documented mistakes that Clara had been carefully fabricating. Late break returns that were actually schedule errors, customer complaints that Derek himself had written anonymously, payment discrepancies that existed only in reports, not reality. Tonight would be the final piece. Tonight, Carolina would make a mistake large enough to justify immediate termination. Derek just needed to help it along. Carolina arrived for her shift at 5 p.m., unaware of what was coming. She'd spent the morning at a free clinic, finally addressing the tension headaches that had been building for weeks. The doctor, a tired woman with kind eyes, had asked if she was under stress. "Just work," Carolina had said. "Stress from work can kill you just as effectively as anything else." The doctor replied, writing a prescription for muscle relaxants Carolina probably couldn't afford. "You need to address the source, not just the symptoms." Carolina had nodded, knowing she wouldn't take the advice. She couldn't afford to quit, couldn't afford to make waves. Her rent was due in 8 days, and her savings account had exactly $243 in it. She just needed to survive Derek's hostility long enough for him to lose interest or get promoted elsewhere. She could endure. She'd endured worse. The cafe filled quickly that evening. Tuesday dinner rush brought the usual crowd, young professionals, couples on dates, a few regulars who came weekly. The pendant lights cast their warm glow over blonde wood and exposed brick. Jazz piano drifted through speakers. The espresso machine hissed rhythmically. Carolina worked her section efficiently, pushing aside the headache still pulsing behind her eyes. Table 3 wanted recommendations. Table 5 needed separate checks. The couple at Table 7 were celebrating an engagement and got complimentary champagne. At 7:30 p.m., the VIP party arrived. 3 men in expensive suits tailored perfectly, watches that cost more than Carolina's car. Derek greeted them personally, shaking hands, laughing at something one of them said. Then he escorted them to Table 12, the best position in the house near the window but away from kitchen noise, with a clear view of the whole cafe. Carolina approached with menus and water. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Carolina, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." They barely looked at her. Already deep in conversation about market trends and portfolio diversification, she took their drink orders, 2 scotches and a wine, and disappeared to the bar. Derek watched from his position near the host stand, watched Carolina work, watched Clara positioning herself near the register, ready. Everything was in place. The dinner progressed smoothly for the first hour. The VIP table ordered appetizers, entrees, desserts. Their conversation remained intense but positive. One of them complimented the seared salmon. Another asked about the wine selection. Carolina remained professional, attentive but not intrusive. Exactly how Derek had trained the staff to handle important clients. At 8:45 p.m., the executives requested their check. Carolina processed the payment at the register. One of the men handed her a corporate card, platinum, heavy in her hand. She swiped it through the system, waited for approval, printed the receipt. The total came to $473. She placed the receipt and card in the leather folder and returned to table 12. "Thank you so much, gentlemen. We hope to see you again soon." They signed without looking at the total, left the folder on the table, stood, still talking, and headed toward the exit where Derek was waiting to walk them out. Carolina cleared the leather folder. The signed receipt showed a tip line, $100, total, $573. She took the folder back to the register to process the final amount, and that's when Clara moved. It happened in less than 30 seconds. Clara had been watching, waiting for Carolina to step away to bus table 9. The moment Carolina's back turned, Clara moved to the register with practiced casualness. She pulled out the signed receipt from table 12, replaced it with an identical receipt, one she'd printed 10 minutes earlier with the same card number, but a different total. This one showed $773 instead of $573. The tip line showed $300 instead of $100. Clara slipped the real receipt into her apron pocket. Then she stepped back to her position near the espresso machine. The whole swap took 12 seconds. By the time Carolina returned to finish processing the payment, Clara was wiping down the counter, looking bored. Derek waited 15 minutes. Long enough for the VIP executives to leave. Long enough for the cafe to remain busy with other customers. Long enough that the confrontation would have maximum witnesses. Then he pulled the doctored receipt from the register, compared it to the transaction record in the computer system. The transaction showed $573 processed. The receipt in his hand showed $773 signed, a $200 discrepancy. Derek's heart rate picked up not from stress, but from anticipation. This was it, the mistake he'd been waiting for. Large enough to be theft, clear enough to be indefensible, public enough to justify immediate termination. He grabbed the receipt and stormed out of his office. Carolina was taking an order at table 6 when Derek's voice cut through the cafe. "Carolina!" The entire dining room fell silent. Forks stopped mid-bite. Conversations died. Even the jazz piano seemed to fade into background static. Derek crossed the floor in 6 aggressive strides, the receipt clutched in his hand like evidence at a trial. "What did you do?" he demanded, voice shaking with manufactured outrage. Carolina turned, confused. "What?" "The VIP table. What did you do with their payment?" I processed it. They paid $473, left a $100 tip." "Liar!" Derek thrust the receipt toward her face. "This says $773. Where's the $200 you stole?" The word stole echoed through the cafe like a gunshot. Carolina's face went pale. "I didn't steal anything. The total was $573. "Don't you dare lie to me." Derek grabbed her collar, the same move he'd practiced in his mind for days. Professional enough to claim restraint, violent enough to humiliate. He shoved her against the espresso counter. Cups rattled. The impact sent a spoon clattering to the floor. Gasps erupted from nearby tables. Someone's chair scraped backward. Sophie, near the host stand, stood frozen with her phone halfway out of her pocket. Derek leaned into Carolina's face, spit flying as he screamed. "You think you're untouchable? You think you can steal from my cafe and walk away?" Carolina tried to explain, but his hand tightened on her collar. Behind the counter, Clara watched with carefully composed features. No smile, no satisfaction, just professional concern for anyone who might be looking. Derek's other hand rose, palm open, shaking with rage. That's when the door opened. The brass bell above the entrance chimed softly. Cool evening air drifted in, carrying the scent of rain-soaked pavement and distant exhaust. The sound cut through Derek's rage like a knife through silk, delicate, precise, impossible to ignore. Derek's hand was still raised, still shaking, still inches from Carolina's face, but something made him pause. Not the bell, not the door. The sudden, suffocating silence that followed. The cafe had gone from shocked murmurs to absolute, frozen quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when predators enter a room and every prey animal instinctively stops moving. Derek turned his head, irritated, ready to snap at whoever had the audacity to interrupt this moment of righteous discipline. The man standing in the doorway didn't look particularly threatening at first glance. Black suit, perfectly tailored, charcoal shirt with the collar open, no tie, maybe 6 feet tall, lean build, early 30s, dark hair swept back, strong jawline, handsome in a way that would photograph well, but it was his stillness that registered first. He didn't rush forward, didn't shout, didn't react at all to the scene of violence happening 6 feet away. He simply stood there, dark eyes scanning the room with the methodical attention of someone inventorying assets before a hostile takeover. His gaze swept across the frozen diners, the anniversary couple at the window, their champagne glasses forgotten, the investors at table 6, suddenly very interested in their phones. Sophie at the host stand, her hand still hovering over the emergency contact in her phone. Then his eyes found the espresso counter, found Derek's hand twisted in Carolina's collar, found Carolina's face pale, throat marked with red fingerprints, eyes wide but not crying. Something in the man's posture changed. Not obviously, just a subtle shift in weight distribution, a fractional tightening around his jaw, a barely perceptible narrowing of his eyes. Like a wolf recognizing prey, he walked forward, not quickly, not aggressively. His footsteps were measured, deliberate, Italian leather shoes clicking softly against tile. Each step seemed to drop the temperature in the room by a degree. Other customers sensed something primal and pressed themselves back into their chairs without understanding why. The couple by the window exchanged wide-eyed glances. One of the investors quietly slipped his wallet into his jacket, preparing to leave quickly if necessary. Derek finally noticed the movement. He turned fully, releasing Carolina just enough to face this interruption, but keeping his hand on her collar to maintain dominance. "We're closed for new seating," Derek snapped, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "You'll have to wait outside or come back tomorrow." The man stopped 6 feet away, close enough to be threatening, far enough to seem controlled. His dark eyes moved slowly, deliberately, from Derek's flushed face down to the hand twisted in Carolina's collar, then back up to meet Derek's gaze. The silence stretched, became uncomfortable, became suffocating. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it carried through the cafe like a bass note through still water felt more than heard. "What's happening here?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Simple, direct, but loaded with something underneath. Something that made Sophie back another step toward the kitchen. Something that made Clara's satisfied expression falter and crack. The room shifted. Customers who'd been pretending not to watch now stared openly. Derek's ego wouldn't let him back down. Not in front of his staff, not in front of customers he'd been trying to impress, not in front of this tattooed stranger who thought he could waltz into Derek's establishment and question his authority. "None of your business," Derek said, tightening his grip on Carolina for emphasis. She winced, and he felt a flash of satisfaction. "This is employee discipline, internal matter. If you want to eat, you can. Let her go." The words were calm, almost gentle, but there was something underneath them that made the hair on Derek's arms stand up. Derek released Carolina more from shock at being interrupted than from actual compliance, and turned to face the stranger fully. He squared his shoulders, puffed his chest, used his height advantage. 6'1", 220 pounds, former linebacker who'd put lesser men in their place with nothing but physical presence. "And who the hell are you?" Derek demanded. The stranger didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked past Derek to Carolina, who'd stepped back from the counter, rubbing her throat where angry red marks were already forming. Her breathing was uneven but controlled. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging. Her eyes met the stranger's, and something passed between them. Recognition, apology, resignation, love. Derek saw it, didn't understand it, but saw it. The stranger looked back at Derek. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not sympathetic, just evaluating. Like he was calculating something complex and inevitable. When he spoke again, his voice was even quieter than before. 4 words. Simple. Final. "She is my sister." The silence that followed was absolute, not the shocked silence from before. This was different. This was the silence of recognition, of understanding, of approximately 40 people in an upscale cafe simultaneously realizing they were watching something very dangerous unfold. Derek blinked, his mouth opened slightly, his brain scrambled to process the words, to match them against something, some fragment of information that was trying to surface from his subconscious. Sister. Rocha. The name came to him in pieces, like a puzzle assembling itself too slowly. Whispered conversations he'd overheard in bars. Warnings from former colleagues about certain people you didn't cross in this city. Names that carried weight. Names that made restaurant owners nervous. Names associated with things Derek had always been smart enough to avoid. Rocha. No. The color began draining from Derek's face like water from a sink. His confident posture wavered. His hands, which had been so aggressive seconds ago, suddenly didn't know where to go. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. You're Horacio Rocha? The man Horacio didn't confirm or deny. He didn't need to. His silence was answer enough. Derek's mind raced through implications, through stories he'd heard, through the business owner who'd warned him months ago about certain families in the city, certain names you never, ever crossed. Horacio Rocha took over his father's network at 24. Strategic, ruthless when necessary, connected to half the legitimate businesses in the city and all of the illegitimate ones. And Derek had just assaulted his sister in front of 40 witnesses. I didn't know, Derek stammered, backing up half a step. It was just, she made a mistake with a payment. You were just touching her, Horacio said softly. With your hand around her throat, in front of all these people. It wasn't a question. Derek's hand started shaking. It wasn't like that. It was professional discipline. He's been harassing me for weeks, Carolina said quietly. Her voice was steady now. Stronger. Like her brother's presence had returned something to her that Derek had been systematically stripping away. Sexual advances, she continued, meeting Derek's eyes directly. Comments about my appearance. Suggestions that I'd advance faster if I was smarter about relationships. Today he cornered me in the storage room. Told me I was one mistake away from being fired. Then Clara framed me for theft so he'd have an excuse. The cafe held its collective breath. Derek's face went from white to gray. That's not I never. Horacio took one step forward. Just one. Derek stumbled backward into a chair. You touched her, Horacio said quietly. And Derek understood, with absolute crystalline clarity, that his career was over, that everything he'd built was gone, that the next few minutes would determine whether he left this cafe walking or on a stretcher. Horacio moved forward with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. Not fast, not violent, just inevitable. Derek backed up another step, knocking into a chair that clattered loudly against the tile floor. The sound echoed through the silent cafe like a gunshot. His hands came up instinctively not to fight, but to ward off something he could feel approaching. Listen, Derek said, voice climbing toward panic. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your sister is a valued employee. Stop talking. The command was quiet, but absolute. Derek's mouth snapped shut. Horacio stopped directly in front of him. Close enough that Derek could see the tattoos crawling up his neck, geometric patterns and script in a language Derek didn't recognize. Close enough to smell subtle cologne mixed with something else, something that made Derek's hindbrain scream warnings about predators and territory and death. Weeks, Horacio said softly, his eyes boring into Derek's. She said weeks of harassment. No, she's confused. I never. Horacio's hand shot forward and gripped the front of Derek's expensive blue shirt. Not violently, not dramatically, just firmly, like picking up an object that needed to be moved. He forced Derek down. Not with a shove, not with aggression, just with steady, inexorable pressure that made resistance impossible. Derek's knees hit the tile floor. Hard, the impact sent shockwaves through his legs. The cafe gasped collectively. Someone's wine glass tipped over, red liquid spreading across white tablecloth. No one moved to clean it. Derek knelt on the floor of his own restaurant, the manager brought low in front of everyone he'd tried to impress. The investors at table 6 stared with open mouths. The anniversary couple looked away, embarrassed by intimacy with violence. Sophie had her phone out now, recording openly, no longer trying to hide it. Clara stood behind the espresso counter, frozen. Her satisfied smile had completely evaporated. She'd expected Derek to fire Carolina, expected vindication, expected validation. She hadn't expected this. Horacio looked down at Derek with an expression that somehow combined contempt and patience, like a parent dealing with a child who disappointed them for the last time. You touched her, Horacio said. In front of all these people. You grabbed her throat. You raised your hand like you were going to hit her. I wasn't going to. I would never. You cornered her in a storage room, Horacio continued, his voice never rising. Told her she'd lose her job if she didn't sleep with you. Made her afraid to come to work. Made her question whether she was safe. Derek's face crumbled. Tears started forming in his eyes. Please, I'm sorry. It wasn't like that. I was just trying to... Trying to what? Horacio asked. Help her? Support her? Is that what you call making someone afraid? Derek had no answer. Horacio glanced at Carolina. She stood by the espresso counter now, rubbing her throat absently, watching the scene with complicated emotions flickering across her face. Relief, shame, vindication, guilt. She'd wanted to handle this herself. Wanted to prove she could survive without her brother's protection. Wanted to build something independent, and now he was here, solving her problems the only way he knew how. "Do you want me to break him?" Horacio asked her directly. The question hung in the air like smoke. Carolina could feel 40 pairs of eyes on her, could feel the weight of the moment. One word from her, and her brother would do it, would break Derek's hands, or his jaw, or his career, or all three. She'd grown up watching her father destroy men for less, watched Horacio learn those same lessons, watched violence become the answer to every question. She'd left that world specifically to escape that cycle. "No," she said quietly. Horacio nodded once, satisfied, like he'd been hoping for that answer. "What do you want?" he asked. Carolina met Derek's eyes, saw him kneeling there, tears streaming down his face, everything he'd built crumbling around him. "I want him exposed," she said. "I want everyone to know what he is." Horacio pulled out his phone. The movement was casual, unhurried. He scrolled through contacts with his thumb while keeping his other hand on Derek's shirt, keeping him kneeling. He selected a number. Put the phone to his ear. 3 rings. "It's me," Horacio said when someone answered. "I'm at Bellario's cafe. Your manager just assaulted my sister in front of your dinner crowd. You should get here." A pause. Horacio listened. "No, I don't think you understand," he continued, his tone patient but firm. "My sister, Carolina Rocha. She's been working here for 7 months. Your manager has been sexually harassing her. Tonight he grabbed her by the throat and tried to fire her for theft she didn't commit. So I'm going to say this once. Get here. Now." He ended the call. Looked at Derek, still kneeling, still crying. "Mr. Bellario is on his way," Horacio said conversationally. "You're going to wait right here until he arrives. You're going to stay on your knees, and you're going to think very carefully about the choices you've made." Derek nodded frantically. "Yes. Okay. Whatever you want. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "You're not sorry yet," Horacio said. "But you will be." The 10 minutes while they waited felt like hours. No one left. No one continued eating. The cafe existed in suspended animation customers, frozen mid-meal, staff hovering uncertainly, the whole space holding its breath. Clara tried to slip toward the back exit. "Stop," Horacio said, not even looking at her. Clara froze. "You helped him," Horacio continued, turning his attention to her for the first time. "You set up the payment trap. You swapped the receipts. I don't know what you're—" "Check the security cameras," Horacio said calmly. "Check the payment logs. Check her apron pocket. I'd bet money you'll find the real receipt there." Clara's face went pale. Sophie, emboldened by Horacio's protection, moved quickly. She reached Clara before she could react, pulling the receipt from her apron pocket. The numbers matched Carolina's version. $573, not $773. "Oh my God," Sophie whispered. "You actually did it." Clara backed against the espresso counter, trapped. "He told me to." Derek said she was stealing tips, said she needed to be taught a lesson. "So you framed her," Horacio said. "You set up an innocent person to be fired, to be humiliated, to be assaulted." Clara started crying. "I was just trying to help." "No," Carolina said, her voice harder than anyone had heard it. "You were jealous. You hated that customers liked me. You hated that I made more tips. So you decided to destroy me." Clara had no response. Mr. Bellario arrived 12 minutes after the phone call. He burst through the door, pale and sweating, his usual composure completely shattered. He was in his 60s, silver hair, expensive watch, the kind of man who'd built his business through careful networking and calculated risks. And now Horacio Rocha was standing in his cafe. "Horacio," he said carefully, stopping just inside the entrance. "I didn't know Carolina never told me." "She wouldn't," Horacio replied. "She doesn't use my name. Doesn't ask for protection. She wanted to make it on her own." Mr. Bellario's eyes moved to Derek, still kneeling on the floor. Then to Carolina, her throat marked with red fingerprints. Then to Clara, crying behind the counter. "What happened?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Your manager has been sexually harassing my sister for weeks," Horacio said calmly. "Tonight, Your other employee framed her for theft. Your manager assaulted her, grabbed her by the throat, in front of 40 witnesses. Mr. Bellario closed his eyes. Mother of God. I want him gone, Horacio said. And her. Done, Mr. Bellario said immediately. Derek, you're terminated. Effective immediately. Clara, same. Security will escort you both out. Derek started to stand. Stay on your knees until security arrives, Horacio said quietly. Derek sank back down. Mr. Bellario pulled out his phone, made quick calls. Within 5 minutes, 2 security guards arrived and escorted both Derek and Clara out of the cafe. Derek still crying, Clara silent and shell-shocked. The door closed behind them, and finally, the cafe could breathe again. Mr. Bellario stood in the center of his cafe, surveying the wreckage of his evening. Red wine still spread across the white tablecloth at table 4. Half-eaten meals sat abandoned on plates. The anniversary couple had left without paying. Sophie had comped their bill without asking permission. The investors at table 6 were gone, disappeared the moment security arrived. The cafe's reputation, carefully built over 2 years, had just taken a nuclear hit. And all because he'd hired Derek Kane without doing proper research. Mr. Bellario was a careful man. He'd built his business through caution, through checking references, through trusting his instincts. But Derek had come with glowing recommendations. A degree in hospitality management. 5 years of experience at a prestigious restaurant downtown. All of it real, none of it complete. Horacio, Mr. Bellario said carefully, turning to face the man who'd just dismantled his manager in under 15 minutes. I didn't know Carolina was your sister. She never mentioned. She wouldn't, Horacio interrupted, his tone neutral. She left my world specifically to avoid this, to build something on her own, without my name, without my protection. Mr. Bellario looked at Carolina, still standing by the espresso counter, still rubbing her throat absently. How long has this been happening? Derek's been harassing me for 6 weeks, Carolina said quietly. Comments about my appearance. Suggestions that I'd advance faster if I was smarter about relationships. 3 weeks ago, he cornered me in the storage room and told me I was one mistake away from being fired. Mr. Bellario's jaw tightened. Why didn't you tell me? You were focused on the new location, Carolina said, and I thought I could handle it myself. I thought he'd eventually lose interest. I thought... Her voice cracked slightly. I thought I could be normal, have a normal job with normal problems, not need to call my brother every time someone threatened me. The emotion in her voice made something in the cafe's atmosphere shift. Horacio, who'd been radiating controlled violence since he walked through the door, softened fractionally. His shoulders relaxed. His expression lost some of its hardness. You are normal, he said to his sister. He isn't. Mr. Bellario walked to the register and pulled up the security camera footage. The system was high-end, multiple angles, high resolution, timestamp accurate to the second. He'd installed it specifically to prevent theft and liability issues. Now it was about to expose his manager as a predator. He scrolled back to 8:43 p.m., found the angle covering the register and espresso counter. There, Clara approaching the register, looking around, pulling the receipt folder, swapping papers, slipping the original receipt into her apron pocket, all in 12 seconds. Mr. Bellario's hands shook as he reversed the footage. He went back further. Found Derek's harassment over the past 6 weeks, documented in uncomfortable detail. Comments made within range of the cameras. The storage room confrontation, partially visible through a doorway. The public humiliations. The shift manipulations. Everything Carolina had described. Everything Derek had denied. I'm going to make copies of this, Mr. Bellario said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I'm going to send it to the labor board, to my insurance company, to every restaurant owner I know so that man never works in this industry again. Good, Horacio said. Mr. Bellario turned to Carolina. I'm so sorry. I should have been paying attention. Should have noticed what was happening. Should have protected you. You didn't know, Carolina said. I should have known. That's my job, to know what's happening in my own establishment. Mr. Bellario ran his hand through his silver hair. Derek is gone. Clara is gone. But that doesn't fix what happened to you. Doesn't undo the harassment or the fear or, he gestured to her throat. That, Carolina touched the red mark self-consciously. They'd fade to bruises by tomorrow. Evidence. Proof. The opposite of what she'd wanted when she left her brother's world. The remaining customers began filtering out slowly. Sophie processed payments quickly, comping half the bills without being asked. The staff moved mechanically, cleaning tables, resetting for tomorrow, trying to process what they'd witnessed. Within 20 minutes, the cafe was empty except for Carolina, Horacio, Mr. Bellario, and Sophie. Mr. Bellario locked the front door, turned the sign to closed. Then he sat down at table 12, the VIP table where this whole nightmare had started, and put his head in his hands. "This is going to destroy us," he said quietly. "The investors won't fund the expansion now. Half our regulars will be too uncomfortable to come back. The labor board investigation will take months. I'll be lucky if I can keep this location open." Horacio pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Or you could use this as an opportunity." Mr. Bellario looked up. "What?" "You have 40 witnesses who saw a manager assault an employee. You have video evidence. You fired him immediately. You took action." Horacio leaned forward slightly. "You didn't protect him. You didn't cover it up. You didn't ask your employee to stay quiet for the good of the business. You did the right thing. That won't bring back the investors." "Maybe not those investors," Horacio said. "But there are others." Something in his tone made Mr. Bellario sit up straighter. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that my sister shouldn't work for people who can't protect her," Horacio said. "That she deserves better than tips and shift schedules and managers who think power gives them access to her body." Mr. Bellario glanced at Carolina. "I agree completely." "Good," Horacio said. "Then let's talk about what comes next." Carolina watched her brother negotiate with her boss like she was watching a play in a foreign language. This was the world she'd left. The world where problems got solved through connections and pressure and carefully worded conversations that sounded friendly but carried implicit threats. She didn't want this. Didn't want to be rescued. Didn't want solutions imposed from above. Didn't want to owe her safety to her brother's reputation. "Stop," she said suddenly. Both men turned to look at her. "Stop planning my life," Carolina continued, her voice stronger now. "Stop deciding what I need. Stop protecting me from consequences I should be able to handle myself." Carolina Horacio started. "No." She stepped forward, away from the espresso counter, into the center of the cafe. "I left your world because I didn't want to be the Mafia boss's sister. I wanted to be Carolina, just Carolina, a person with a normal job and normal problems." "This wasn't a normal problem," Horacio said gently. "This was assault." "I know that," Carolina's voice cracked. "I know what Derek did. I know what Clara did. I know I should have told someone sooner, should have fought back harder, should have—" She stopped, took a breath. "But I also know that the moment you walked through that door, I stopped being Carolina the waitress and became Carolina the sister, the protected one, the one who needs men to solve her problems." The cafe was silent. "Is that what you think?" Horacio asked quietly. "That I don't respect your strength?" "I think you love me," Carolina said. "And I think love makes you want to fix things. But I don't want to be fixed. I want to choose my own path." Horacio stood slowly, walked to his sister, looked at the bruises forming on her throat, evidence of his failure to protect her, evidence of her courage to face danger alone. "What do you want?" he asked. Carolina looked at her brother, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd walked through the door. She saw the tattoos crawling up his neck marks of the world he'd chosen, the life he'd built after their father died. She saw the expensive suit, the controlled posture, the dangerous calm that made strangers nervous without understanding why. But underneath all of that, she still saw the boy who'd protected her, who'd taken beatings meant for her, who'd told her stories about safe places when their father's house felt like a prison. "I want to not be afraid anymore," she said finally. "I want to work without wondering if my boss is going to corner me in a storage room. I want to earn money without someone sabotaging me out of jealousy. I want to build something that's mine." Horacio nodded slowly. "Then build it." "With what?" Carolina gestured around the cafe. "I have $243 in savings. I can barely afford rent. How am I supposed to build anything?" "With help," Horacio said. Carolina's expression hardened. "I don't want your money." "Why not?" "Because it's not clean. Because it comes from the same world I left. Because accepting it means admitting I can't survive without you." The words hung between them like broken glass. Mr. Bellario shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Sophie had retreated to the kitchen, giving them privacy. Horacio was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than Carolina had heard it in years. You think I don't know what it cost you to leave? He asked. You think I didn't understand what you were saying when you got on that bus with 2 suitcases and didn't look back? Carolina's eyes burned with unshed tears. You were saying you loved me but couldn't become me, Horacio continued. That you needed to find out who Carolina Rocha was without Gabriel's shadow, without my protection, without the family name dictating every choice. Yes, Carolina whispered. And you did that? Horacio said. For 2 years you built a life. You worked honest jobs. You made friends who didn't know your last name meant anything. You proved you could survive without me. Then Derek happened. Derek would have happened regardless, Horacio said firmly. Men like him exist everywhere. They abuse power everywhere. You didn't fail because he harassed you. He failed because he thought power made him untouchable. Carolina wiped her eyes roughly. But I still needed you to fix it. No, Horacio corrected gently. You needed someone to witness what he did, to make sure he faced consequences. That someone happened to be me, but it could have been the police, could have been a lawyer, could have been Mr. Bellario if you'd told him weeks ago. Mr. Bellario nodded emphatically. I would have fired Derek immediately if I'd known. See, Horacio said. You didn't need me specifically. You needed justice. And yes, I provided it faster and more definitively than the legal system would have. But that doesn't mean you failed. Carolina took a shaky breath. It feels like failure. I know, Horacio said. Because Father taught us that needing help was weakness, that asking for support meant you weren't strong enough. That independence meant suffering alone. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. But that was a lie, Carolina. Strength isn't refusing help. Strength is knowing when to accept it. The cafe was silent except for the hum of the refrigeration units. Carolina looked at her brother, this man who'd become everything their father wanted, but somehow remained the boy who'd protected her, who'd let her leave without trying to stop her, who'd respected her choice even when it hurt him. What are you offering? She asked finally. Funding for your own cafe, Horacio said. In your name, your concept, your rules. I provide the capital. You provide everything else. And what do you get? The knowledge that my sister is safe, that she works for herself, that no one can ever put their hands on her throat again without facing immediate consequences. Carolina shook her head. That's not how business works. No one invests money without expecting return. Then give me 10%, Horacio said. Silent partner. No input on operations, no influence on hiring, no presence in the daily business. Just a small ownership stake that ensures if you ever need help legal, financial, security, you can ask without feeling like you owe me. 10%, Carolina repeated. 10%, Horacio confirmed. And if you want to buy me out later, when the business is profitable, we'll set a fair price. Mr. Bellario leaned forward. Carolina, that's an incredibly generous offer. Most investors would demand 40–50% for startup capital. I'm not most investors, Horacio said. I'm her brother. Carolina walked to the window, looked out at the street beyond. Rain had started falling, drops streaking down the glass, distorting the streetlights into abstract patterns. She thought about the past 2 years, the independence she'd fought for, the identity she'd built separate from her family name, the person she'd become without protection or privilege. She thought about Derek's hand on her throat, about Clara's satisfied smile, about feeling powerless in a situation that should have been simple workplace conflict. She thought about what her father would have done, solved everything with violence, demanded absolute control, made her dependence permanent. And she thought about what Horacio was offering: capital without strings, support without ownership, help without humiliation. 75,000, she said, still looking out the window. Startup capital for lease, equipment, initial inventory, and 3 months operating expenses. 10% equity, silent partnership with buyout clause, separate legal entity with my name only on the business license. Behind her, she heard Horacio's quiet laugh. You've been researching. I've been planning, Carolina corrected. I just didn't have the capital. Done, Horacio said. My lawyer will draw up papers tomorrow. Carolina turned to face him. I'm not going to run it like your business is. No intimidation. No off-book deals. No favors for connected people. Everything legal. Everything clean. I wouldn't want it any other way. And if you ever try to interfere with operations, you'll buy me out, Horacio finished. I understand. Carolina studied her brother's face, looking for manipulation, for hidden agenda, for the control their father would have disguised as generosity. She found none of it. Just a man who loved his sister and wanted her safe. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, we have a deal." Horacio smiled, genuinely smiled, something he rarely did. "When do you start?" "After I give proper notice," Carolina said, glancing at Mr. Bellario. Mr. Bellario waved his hand. "Consider yourself released. After tonight, you've earned a fresh start. Besides," he looked around the cafe, "I need to rebuild my own management structure. Might take the rest of the week." "Then I start Monday," Carolina said. "Location scouting, business plan finalization, equipment vendors. Send me your plan by Friday," Horacio said. "I'll have the capital ready by Monday morning." They stood in the empty cafe, brother and sister, connected by blood and trauma and love, separated by choices but united in respect. "Thank you," Carolina said quietly. "Thank me by building something beautiful," Horacio replied. Carolina signed the lease on a small storefront, 4 blocks from Bellario's on a Thursday morning. The space was raw, exposed pipes, concrete floors, walls that needed paint. But it had good bones. Large windows facing east for morning light. High ceilings that made the 600 square feet feel larger. A back room perfect for storage and office space. She stood in the center of the empty room, holding the keys, feeling their weight in her palm. This was hers. Not her brother's. Not Mr. Bellario's. Not dependent on anyone's approval or protection or mercy. Hers. The landlord, a woman in her 50s, who owned 3 properties on this block, had asked about the Rocha name during the application process. "Any relation to Horacio Rocha?" she'd asked carefully. Carolina had met her eyes directly. "He's my brother. He's a silent investor. But this is my business, my vision, my responsibility." The landlord had nodded, satisfied. "Good. I respect family support, but I need tenants who can stand on their own." "I can," Carolina had said, and she meant it. The first week was chaos. Permits, insurance, vendor contracts, equipment orders, health department inspections, business bank account setup, accounting software installation, menu development, pricing strategy, staff recruitment. Carolina worked 16-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and determination. She met with contractors about renovations, negotiated with equipment suppliers, taste-tested coffee roasts from 5 different vendors before selecting one, designed the menu herself, simple, fresh, focused. She hired carefully. 5 staff members, all interviewed extensively. She asked about their previous work experiences, particularly about management, about whether they'd ever felt unsafe, about what kind of workplace culture they wanted. Sophie applied first. "I can't work at Bellario's anymore," she'd said. "Not after seeing what Derek did. What Mr. Bellario didn't notice. I want to work somewhere better." "This place will be better," Carolina promised. "But that means if you ever see something wrong, harassment, theft, anything, you tell me immediately. No exceptions." "Deal," Sophie said. Carolina hired 2 servers with 10 years combined experience. A barista who'd trained in Italy, a part-time bookkeeper who'd run her own business before retiring. She didn't hire anyone who reminded her of Clara. Anyone whose eyes showed envy instead of ambition. The renovations took 3 weeks. Painters made the walls warm cream. Contractors installed new flooring, wood-look tile that was practical but beautiful. Electricians hung pendant lights she'd found at a salvage shop. Plumbers connected the commercial espresso machine that cost more than her first car. Slowly, the empty storefront transformed. Horacio visited once during the renovation. He walked through the space quietly, hands in his pockets, examining everything without commenting. Carolina watched him, nervous despite herself, waiting for criticism or suggestions or attempts at control. Finally, he stopped near the window and looked back at her. "It's perfect," he said simply. "You haven't even seen the menu," Carolina replied. "I don't need to. I can see you in every choice, every detail." He gestured around the space. "This is what you were supposed to become." Something in Carolina's chest loosened. "Thank you for letting me." "I didn't let you," Horacio corrected gently. "You chose this. I just made sure you had the resources to choose it." He left 20 minutes later, after confirming the security system was properly installed, and the back door had a reinforced lock. Brother instincts, Carolina thought. He couldn't help but protect, even when stepping back. The cafe opened on a Monday morning in October. Carolina unlocked the front door at 6 a.m., hands shaking slightly. The space smelled like fresh paint and coffee and possibility. She'd sent announcements to her regular customers from Belario's, posted on local social media groups, distributed flyers in the neighborhood. But she had no idea if anyone would actually come. At 6:17 a.m., the first customer walked through the door. An elderly man who'd been a regular at Belario's, who'd always tipped 20% and asked about her day. "Carolina," he said, smiling. "I heard you opened your own place. Had to be first in line." Relief flooded through her. "What can I get you?" "Whatever you recommend," he said. "I trust your judgment." By 7 a.m., there was a line out the door. By 8:30 a.m., every table was full. By noon, they'd sold out of 3 menu items and had to brew 2 emergency batches of coffee. Carolina worked the floor alongside her staff, taking orders, delivering food, clearing tables. Her feet ached. Her back hurt. She was exhausted and stressed and completely, perfectly happy. This was what she'd fought for. What she'd left her brother's world to find. Not safety, not comfort, not protection. Choice, agency, the ability to build something that reflected who she was, not who her family expected her to be. At 2 p.m., during the afternoon lull, a woman walked in alone. Professional attire, expensive handbag, confidence that came from power legitimately earned. She sat at a corner table and ordered coffee and a sandwich. When Carolina delivered the order, the woman looked at her directly. "Carolina Rocha?" Carolina's guard went up immediately. "Yes, I'm Jennifer Walsh. I was one of the investors at Belario's the night your manager assaulted you." Carolina's stomach dropped. "Oh, I wanted to tell you something," Jennifer continued. "After that night I did research, found out about your brother, about your family background, about the world you left." Carolina waited, unsure where this was going. "And I wanted you to know," Jennifer said, "that what impressed me wasn't your brother's intervention. It was you. The way you handled being assaulted with dignity, the way you demanded exposure rather than revenge, the way you clearly wanted justice, not violence." She pulled out a business card. "If you ever need additional investment capital for expansion, for a second location, whatever, call me. Not because of your brother, because of you." Carolina took the card, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she managed. Jennifer smiled. "Thank you for showing what strength actually looks like." She finished her coffee, paid, and left. Carolina stood holding the business card, feeling something shift inside her chest. She'd spent 2 years trying to prove she could survive without her family name. And she'd just received validation not in spite of that name, but because of who she'd become independent of it. That evening, after closing, Carolina sat alone in her cafe. The space was quiet, clean, hers. She pulled out her phone and texted her brother. "First day was good. Thank you for believing in me." His response came quickly. "I always believed. You just needed to believe in yourself." Carolina smiled, set down her phone and looked around her cafe. The pendant lights cast warm glows across cream walls. The espresso machine gleamed. The tables were set for tomorrow. Outside, the city moved on, people heading home from work, cars passing, life continuing in its normal, beautiful chaos. And inside, Carolina Rocha sat in the business she'd built, wearing bruises that would fade but carrying strength that wouldn't. She was her brother's sister, but she was also herself, and that, finally, was enough. Thanks for sticking with this story until the very end. You're the reason these stories feel alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to read your thoughts and connect with you in the comments.